Okay, so today I'm going to be going over the Holocaust, and I know you guys have had a lot of information on the Holocaust before, but I'm kind of going to go through it in detail today and hopefully answer some of those questions that you guys might have about the topic. Any questions that you might have, like try to maybe write them down or whatnot, we can talk about those on Monday, since obviously I'm not here today, went to actually do the lecture in person. So, here we go. The Holocaust, which is obviously a large part of World War II, and it's its own section because you have the war in Europe, you have the war in the Pacific, and then on top of all of this, the Holocaust is occurring at the same time as both of these theaters. The picture that you are looking at right now is from the one of the most notorious extermination camps, that is Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is the second camp that's going to be created at Auschwitz, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. So let's go ahead and get started. So we kind of addressed this already a little bit, but why the Jews? Why did Hitler and the Nazi Party choose the Jews as a scapegoat? Well, first of all, I want to review that vocabulary term of anti-Semitism. Hopefully you mean that's like anti-Jew or hostility or prejudice against the Jewish people. And that is what the Nazis were invoking within Nazi Germany and all of their people. There was tons of propaganda and things like that against the Jewish people. And so the Nazis in Hitler were telling the Germans that they came from this superior race, the Aryan race. And we've already talked about that. You know, it's the light skin, light eyes, and light hair. And you know, that the Jews were messing up this master race and that they needed to be done away with and moved out of Germany. This idea of anti-Semitism was not new to the Germans. It had been present in German folktales and music since the Middle Ages. And so we're going to talk about some examples of how this, like Hitler got some ideas from the 1400s and brings them back into the 1900s. But along with appealing to German pride and like building up this sense of unity by, you know, working together to achieve this master race and to achieve this empire of this master race, it also provided a scapegoat for all of Germany's problems and worries in the Nazi Empire. So anything that had went wrong, they blamed it on the Jewish people. And yeah, so they were always that scapegoat. They were the scapegoat in World War I. They were the scapegoat of why they were in poverty as well too. And he used that to his advantage. So, as we continue looking at this, obviously the Jewish people had been in Germany for over 1,000 years. If you know the biblical history, they originated in that territory known as Israel, will be pushed away from their homeland, and then that is when they continue to settle over Europe. But in Germany, it had been around 1,600 years, and the hostility and the anti-Semitism within that area have been building up since the Middle Ages. So, for example, you guys probably all know about the yellow Star of David that they had to wear on their chest or on their sleeve that identified them as being Jewish. That was not a new idea. Hitler didn't just make that up himself. He actually got that from the Middle Ages and from his history, and pulled that idea back and used it within the Nazi Empire as part of the Nuremberg laws. And so that yellow Star of David, wearing that in your jacket, that was not an original idea. That was an idea from the Middle Ages that he used. And so Nazi law identified anyone with a Jewish grandparent as a Jew, even though they might have not had any association with Judaism. So actually, they went back 4 generations in your heritage. And if you had anyone that was a practicing Jew, you were considered Jewish. It did not matter if you were Protestant, if you were Catholic, if you were Orthodox or whatnot. If you had a practicing Jew within your family 4 decades back or 4 generations back, you were considered Jewish. And so essentially, like, kids are like, well, how do they know? Well, you essentially had to prove that you were not Jewish and show and identify that. You know, if you had the light skin, light hair, light eyes, you weren't questioned as much. But especially if you had that darker skin and hair and whatnot, they questioned you. So here you can see people of the Nazi Empire. These are Jewish people, and they had to wear that yellow Star of David on their jacket. So that's what I was talking about there. This is their identification card. You can see that essentially it's like, if you think about it, it's like a passport or a driver's license. But on their identification card, they had to have a big J stamped on their card to identify them as Jewish. So not only were they wearing the Star of David, but their papers also said, I am Jewish. And hopefully you guys remember that Judaism is a religion. It is not a race. But he is kind of lumping it together as if it is a race. So when Hitler comes to power in about 1935, he establishes what is known as the Nuremberg Laws. So part of those Nuremberg Laws were, number one, you had to have identification that you were Jewish. You also had to wear the yellow Star of David on your jacket or coat or whatnot to identify that you were Jewish. Or, it'd be the yellow Star of David, or like they'd have a sleeve. I think you'll see some of those examples here in a minute. Another example of the Nuremberg Laws is like you could not vote. You didn't have citizenship. It took away all of your civil and economic rights. Like you didn't have the same rights as a German living in Germany. And also you couldn't marry Germans. It was forbidden for Jewish people to marry Germans. And so this happens in 1935 with the Nuremberg Laws. Essentially, I want you guys to realize Hitler originally was not trying to exterminate all the Jewish people. Right now, he is creating an environment that is hostile and not really livable. Like, why would people want to live in Germany if you're having to deal with all these horrible laws and things like that? So essentially, he's trying to push them out of Germany. At the moment, he is not trying to exterminate the Jewish people. He's essentially trying to push them out of Germany so that they would leave. And so that's kind of his first step in that direction, is trying to rid the German Empire of all the Jewish people, and he starts with the Nuremberg Laws. This is a German document that goes through the process of identifying if you were Jewish or not. And you can kind of see from the circles, like the two ones on the end, Jude and Jude, which is meaning Jewish, you can kind of see how they've traced back generations and they've had Jewish heritage. Now, I can't read German, but from reading about the document, that is essentially what it is showing. And so this is like the requirements of being considered a Jewish person. So as these Nuremberg laws were passed, violent acts against the Jewish people were also increasing as well too, because there was more and more propaganda that was out there that was advertising the Jewish people as this menace and out to get the Germans, and how they are lower than the Jewish people and not as significant as the German people. And so all of this propaganda is put out by a man named Joseph Goebbels. And Joseph Goebbels is like one of Hitler's right-hand men. Like when we talk about like Hitler's entourage, this is one of the most important people within his entourage, was Joseph Goebbels. Joseph Goebbels was there when Hitler committed suicide in his bunker at the end of World War II. And he was essentially his master of propaganda. And he was the one that put out the advertisements and the signs and things like that, that advertised the Jewish menace, and advertise the Aryan race as well too. This is Joseph Goebbels. You guys might have saw him in that Nazi Germany in color. He did speak. I kind of pointed him out, but there you can see him right there. Once again, meeting with some German soldiers. So this is your master of propaganda that spread the idea about the Jewish people throughout Germany. This is him with all of his children. At the end of World War II, he will commit suicide after Hitler commits suicide, because he was scared for his family as well too. So him and his wife commit suicide, and so did the children, I believe. Here is Joseph Goebbels on his wedding day. If you look into the background there, you can see someone that might look familiar. Yes, that is Adolf Hitler at Joseph Goebbels' wedding day. So, as I said, one of the closest associates within Hitler's entourage. He was high up there on men that Hitler trusted the most. Now, when looking at the Holocaust, and when people considering when did the Holocaust begin, like when do we see the start of the Holocaust, when do we see the end of the Holocaust, some people say it was the Nuremberg Laws. In 1935, the establishment of the Nuremberg Laws, this is when you first start to see the beginnings of the Holocaust. Some people classify it as this date here, November 9th, 1938, which is Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht means the night of broken glass. And this is the first really, truly violent act on the Jewish people that we see, and some people consider this as the beginning of the Holocaust. So it's Kristallnacht is the night of broken glass, and essentially what ends up happening is that there is a scuffle between a Jewish teenager and a German officer, and the Jewish teenager does supposedly assassinate the German officer, and then things just go crazy from there. The Germans go around and start like breaking down all these Jewish businesses and like burning all of their books and burning down the synagogues. And the Nazis were encouraging this violence among everyone. And so not only did it start out in like one area of Germany, but then it started to spread throughout Germany, and all these riots and things occurred all throughout the country. And the violence was encouraged. And so thousands of Jewish businesses and places of worship were damaged. 100 Jews were killed this evening, and 26,000 Jewish people were sent to concentration camps. And at this point in time, concentration camps were just essentially labor camps that were meant to hold enemies of the state. They were not just for Jewish people. So this is anyone that went against the Nazi Empire was sent to a concentration camp. So at this point, it is a labor camp for enemies of the state, which is kind of very similar to Stalin's gulags. You could think of it in that perspective. But 26,000 Jewish people were arrested and sent to these concentration camps on this night, November 9th, 1938, which we call Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, because of all the damage that has happened to all the Jewish businesses and synagogues. This is a Jewish synagogue here. You can see it's pretty completely destroyed. You can see some of the Jewish businesses as well here. All the glass broken. It's where it gets its name. Another synagogue again. So that is kind of like our first real violent event that happens during the Holocaust. And there's another example of a synagogue burning down. So not only did they like destroy parts of them and like just break them, they also burned some of the synagogues down as well too. Now, hopefully you know that during the Holocaust, it obviously there was, around 12 million people that were killed in the Holocaust. 6 million of them were Jewish people. The other 6 million come from this group known as enemies of the state. And these people were automatically just sent to concentration camps because they fit this description. So if you were a gypsy, if you were a Freemason, if you were a Jehovah's Witness, if you were a homosexual, if you were mentally deficient, meaning you, like, for example, paralyzed or had lost a leg or something like that, well, that's physically deficient. Mentally deficient is like meaning you're like mentally ill, but they also had people that were physically deficient as well too, sent to these camps or killed. But if you were like in a mental hospital or whatnot, you were classified as enemies of the state. And so the other 6 million victims of the Holocaust come from this group of people. And eventually, when the Germans would capture Soviet prisoners of war, Soviets were thrown into those concentration camps as well too. So as I said, some consider this event, Kristallnacht, the beginning of the Holocaust. Now, as we had talked about, Hitler at this point, he's not trying to purposely kill all the Jewish people. At this point, he's trying to drive the Jewish people out of Germany, and it's working. Over 100,000 Jews managed to leave Germany during this time in the months following Kristallnacht. And when all these people flee, a lot of people tried to go to the United States. And at this point in time, the United States actually was limiting the amount of foreigners coming into the United States. This would be very similar if you guys know anything about the Syrian refugees, and we had there's all over the news on should we accept the Syrian refugees? They have all these crazy things going on in Syria. Do we accept them into our country and whatnot? You could almost consider that's very comparable to the Holocaust, in which we actually limited the amount of people coming from Germany that were Jewish. This area that was war torn and whatnot. We limited the amount of people that were able to come into our country. There is one famous German that was Jewish in history that is able, that fled Germany and came to the United States. He was actually in the United States already. He just chose, I'm not going back. I'm not going back home. He decided to stay in the United States. This man was a very famous scientist in history and is also going to help us with the development of the atomic bomb. And you're going to see his picture here in 1 minute. Albert Einstein. So I don't know if you were thinking about that, but Albert Einstein was Jewish, and he was actually already in the United States and had heard about the things happening, and he decides to stay in the United States, and he does not return home. And he finds refuge in the United States, and so that's why Albert Einstein was not killed in the Holocaust, and he does help us with the development of the atomic bomb. These are Jewish people that are, coming to America. They did find refuge here, but as I said, we limited the amount of people coming into the United States at this point in time. So that is like everything up to like the real beginning of the Holocaust. And we have Kristallnacht, which is that famous night of broken glass. And now we look at the Holocaust and we essentially break it up into 3 different phases, okay, in which Hitler is going to systematically try to exterminate the Jewish people. And it happens in 3 phases. So the first phase is the relocation to the ghettos. Okay, so we're going to talk about that here in a second. The second phase is the concentration camps. I want to mention the concentration camps had already existed before the ghettos were even created. But they were not purposely driving hundreds and thousands of people to the concentration camps yet. They're going to get rid of the ghettos and then send them to concentration camps. And then he then speeds up the process and creates a new type of camp, which is known as an extermination camp. And this is what he calls the final solution. The final solution is essentially the extermination of the Jewish people, on which he is going to commit this genocide. And so step 3, or the final phase, is the final solution, and that is when the extermination camps are going to be created. So a little bit of statistics on Germany before Hitler came over there, Europe. When Hitler came into power, there were 9 million Jews that lived in Europe. And remember that number, because 6 million of them are going to die in the Holocaust, and so only 3 million will survive the Holocaust. And so my next point is this soon changes when many of the Jews came under the control of the Nazi SS. The Nazi SS were the ones that ran the concentration camps and the extermination camps and the ghettos and things like that. They were the worst of the worst of Hitler's military. They were the most cruel and immoral people of the entire group of the Nazis. And so they were the ones working the concentration camp. So my definition there is the feared police and military force that carried out terror activities for the Nazis. And their treatment of the Jewish people was especially brutal. So we're going to start with phase 1, which is forced relocation. So, after he puts in these Nuremberg laws and everything like that, essentially, like, not all the Jews are leaving Germany and the German Empire. So he wants to essentially force them all into this one area. So he has them all located in one spot. And they're segregated from the rest of the people. So he creates what is known as these ghettos. These ghettos are segregated Jewish areas in certain Polish cities. So just essentially it'd be like this city, and then this one section of the city is essentially sectioned off, and that is where all the Jewish people live. And it's not like this, it's this large, luxurious part of the city. It's very, very cramped, and you're living with anyone. So essentially you had to leave everything behind. Like, you're being relocated to this ghetto, you have an apartment or like a little part of a house that you're living in, and you're living with like 12 other new people that you've never even met before. And you can only take from your home whatever you can carry. And so this is this forced relocation to the ghettos. They were terribly, terribly crowded. There was forced labor within the ghettos. They were sealed off by stone walls and also barbed wire. You're going to see some pictures in a minute. They were very, very dirty. There was hardly any food there, and also there was no medical treatment. So essentially, they're treating them horribly, and a lot of this is going to end up in the death of a lot of people as well, too, because of the conditions of the ghettos. So this map here is an interesting map because it shows you the cities with the ghettos, the extermination camps, and the concentration camps. And the cities with the ghettos are the little yellow and red ones. And so you can see, like, there's Budapest and Krakow, They're mostly over in Poland. That's where a lot of the Jewish people lived, was in Poland. And that's where most of the Jewish people are going to be killed, is Poland. Krakow, you look at this right here, that is the ghetto that is closest to Auschwitz. Auschwitz is in Krakow, essentially right outside of Krakow. And then the largest ghetto was Warsaw. The Warsaw Ghetto was the largest ghetto, and there'll be an uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto. And I think I have some statistics on that coming up here in a second. But yeah, you can see where most of the ghettos were located, and that's where all these Jewish people had to go and live. Here you can see they're building up the stone wall to create a limit in the ghetto. Like, this is your area. You had to go be within the walls at a certain time. You left to maybe go work, but then you were walked back at night. There were people that did try to escape. If you tried to escape, you were going to be killed. As I said, you were only allowed to take whatever they could carry, and if you tried to escape, you were shot. So you had to stay within those walls and deal with those conditions every day. The largest ghetto, as I said, was Warsaw. 1 million people were crammed into a 1.5 square mile living space. Guys, think about that. 1.5 square miles, and there's 1 million people that are crammed in there. And they have taken all their belongings that they can, and they are now living with a bunch of random people they've never even met before. Like, a lot of these people had beautiful houses. They had jobs. They were doctors. They were lawyers and so forth as well too, or bankers, and now they're leaving that to go live within this ghetto. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're a musician. It does not matter any of that. You were only worth as much to the Nazis as what you could provide. And so a lot of these people had to lie and say, like, I'm a metal worker or whatnot, so that they wouldn't be sent off somewhere else. Because some of the people in the ghettos were sent off to concentration camps if you were not viable to the Nazis. So if you were a musician, you're not viable to the Nazis. And so you would be sent off to a concentration camp. You wouldn't even get to live in the ghetto. But if you were viable and could help work, for example, if you're a metal worker, then you would be able to stay. So you had to have your work card as well too. And if you ever tried to leave and didn't have your work card, then you couldn't prove anything, and then you were also shipped off to the concentration camps as well too. So yeah. This is another picture of the ghetto. So you can see it has this fence here that's constantly being guarded. And, these weren't just in towns. People, lived next to these things and just saw